Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our session today. Speaking with multiple investors here on From Angel to Exit, Seeding the Future of Health. On today's session, you'll hear from some of the region's top investors on several topics pertinent to founders, investors, and those looking to learn more about both. I'm Dr. Richard Banassi, founder of Blackfin Venture Partners and also Blackfin Technology Partners, as well as director of the Tampa Bay Wave Accelerator Program. With me today are several great speakers, and thank you all for joining us today. I'd like to actually kick things off with an intro and around the horn here. Why don't we start with Dr. Lance Black from Thrive Labs?
Thanks, Richard, and thanks to Russ, Mark, and Health Connect South for having me on this panel. So a bit of a background, a little bit of a scattered history here. I started off and was trained as a biological engineer and thought it was a good idea to go to medical school and practice medicine, which I did for 7 years as a family medicine physician before I decided to get back into technology, where I got additional training at Georgia Tech in product development. Shortly thereafter, I joined GCMI of Atlanta, product development firm, where I met many great entrepreneurs and early stage med tech companies, helped them to build out and test and break their prototypes. And then I came over to Texas Medical Center's Innovation Institute here in Houston and spent the last 4.5 years helping to lead some of their programs, their accelerator and biodesign program, working very closely with med tech and digital health companies. And most recently, in the past 6 months, I actually left and joined Thrive Labs, which is a med tech company based out of Atlanta, now under the new parent company called Roevios. So it's a pleasure to join the panel, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us today. Next up, Chris from Huxley Medical.
Richard, thanks again for having me on the panel. My name's Chris. Technical background as well, did my undergraduate in material science and engineering, my PhD in biomedical engineering at Georgia Tech and Emory. Started my first company after my PhD off of a high strength porous polymer that was developed at Georgia Tech. That material promoted bone growth, started a spinal implant company based off that, got a few products through the FDA, ended up selling that company in 2017 to a larger company called Evasive, based out of San Diego. And after I stayed on for the post-merger integration for about 1.5 years, I took a year off and really tried to figure out what I wanted to do next. That's when I dabbled into angel investing. That's when I also dabbled a little bit into philanthropy as well. And then after that, started my current company, Huxley Medical. And currently I do both angel investing and obviously the serial entrepreneur thing. So my perspective comes from both the founder side and also the investor side.
Excellent. Tim, Cox Enterprises.
Yeah, Tim Howe, thanks for having me today. I started my career as a developer, and I quickly got the entrepreneurial bug, had several entrepreneurial pursuits, but the dot bomb kind of hit me, and was really enamored with investing. And so I actually joined GE Capital, because at the time you either on, all the big VC firms, you either went to Harvard, Stanford, or a lot of people come in at GE Capital. So I went there, really only wanted to be there for 2 years. And 15 years later, I'd traveled the globe and had quite a bit of interaction with operations, investments, and M&A. I joined Cox about 6 years ago in their diversification efforts. So I've been focused on the healthcare diversification efforts of the company. And thanks for having me.
Absolutely pleasure to host you here and all of the speakers today. Next up, Phillip Lewis, Fulcrum Equity Partners.
Hey, thanks for having me today. Really appreciate it. My background started off in investment banking right back in '07, and then shortly thereafter was fortunate enough to join up with the founders of Fulcrum, actually as their first analyst back in '07. So really been here for almost 15 years now. I've taken a few operating detours, one to be the CFO of a health IT company, help run that to merge with another business, one with a fintech company here in town, SAS Optics, really in operational development role. And then recently left Fulcrum for about 9 months to help kind of do a turnaround of a global healthcare billing company, grew that, and ended up promoting somebody internally before transitioning back to Fulcrum as a full-time partner in our fourth fund. So really looking forward to the conversation here today.
Excellent. I am as well. I'd like to kick things off with a very simple question that will likely not have a very simple answer. What drove you to want to get involved in the startup investment sector? I'd like to kick that off with Lance.
Great question. And I was kind of pulled into it. It really wasn't a decision as much as it was wanting to further support the company's that we were working with through TMCX. We started a TMC Venture Fund, $25 million fund focused on supporting seed and early stage companies. And I spent a lot of time helping companies to prepare to present or pitch or to go through the diligence process with investors, having not ever seen really the other side. And I saw this as an opportunity to see what decisions were being made across the table, what kind of frameworks were they using to evaluate these companies. And that's what drew my attention and interest in working with TMC Venture Fund, which I helped through the past 4 years.
Excellent. Tim, same question. What drove you to want to get involved in the startup investment sector?
Yeah, as I had mentioned, I started off really as an entrepreneur, and just working with other entrepreneurs. There's so much like infectious energy and enthusiasm trying to help people build their dreams. And as an investor, you really get to work with multiple entrepreneurs. So it's like it's a good way of being, and just watching people solve big problems and again pursue their dreams, create some wealth is a lot of fun. So that's what drew me into the space in general.
Phillip?
Yeah, I wish I had a great answer for that one. I mean, really, it was a desire not to move back into my parents' basement. So the bank that I was working for back in 2007 was A.G. Edwards. They got acquired by Wachovia, and I was looking for a new gig. So I got fortunate enough to land at Fulcrum, where their focus was healthcare and technology. And I just kind of fell in love with the healthcare tech space and technology in general, really the disruption that it can make, the benefit it can have on people's lives, and really kind of focusing on companies where you're either providing a better outcome for the patient or you're taking costs out of the system. So you're actually making a real benefit on society. So it kind of became a passion for mine. It wasn't really planned, but I love it, and I can't imagine doing anything else at this point.
Me too. Chris, what about you?
Yeah, so I think similar to Tim, my background as an entrepreneur kind of led me into angel investing. I think at a super high level, I just like to work with and invest in people that I enjoy working with and problems that I enjoy solving. And that typically has centered in the healthcare, med tech type space.
Excellent. When it comes to companies engaging with investors, knowing the investment focus and thesis of a fund, family office, venture capital group, angel, or corporate venture capital group is incredibly important. If a startup is in pre-seed or seed stage and reaches out to an A-round investor, or one that does not truly play in their space, it can be a waste of time for one or both parties, signal a lack of preparation, or worse. Why don't we go around the horn and each of you share your investment focus and thesis with our audience, starting with Phillip, Fulcrum Equity Partners.
Yeah, thank you. It's actually funny that you asked that question. I was on a call with an entrepreneur yesterday, and when we were finishing up the call, I said, thanks for your time today. Having this conversation with me and any other investor is an hour that you're not spending focused on your business. And that's so true. Fundraising is extremely distracting. It's very time consuming, and focusing on talking to the right investors is really, really key. From our perspective, we're kind of growth equity. So we're really focused on companies that have product market fit, have some revenue. So really companies focused 2 million to 10 million in recurring revenue, high growth businesses looking to raise anywhere from kind of 5 to 25 million. So really looking for companies that already have some traction and that are really kind of looking for that acceleration capital, not really that product market fit capital.
Excellent. Thank you. Chris, being on the other side of the spectrum on the angel side, curious your thesis and what you're looking for. And of course, you could also be looking for very much similar things as Phillip.
Yeah, no, I think you totally hit that right, Richard. Opposite end of the spectrum, typically pre-revenue, pre-seed, pre-series A type of companies. And kind of like what I said before, just looking for people that I enjoy working with or would like to work with, and also looking at problems I like to solve, problems that need to be solved or that I want to look at solving. And I think kind of what Phillip alluded to, more of that product market type fit type of capital, not necessarily the scale capital. And I think when you look at it, just giving a little bit more granular at what I mean by that, I kind of look more at the team structure. So more so at the team is what I prioritize, because I think if you have good operators, you could kind of turn a B idea into a good exit. And then after that, just looking at product market fit, looking at how that's being protected. And then kind of the third bucket that I look at in addition to team and kind of the value proposition that you're trying to solve is just the unit economics at scale, and whether or not there's a path to that.
Excellent. Thank you. Lance?
Yeah, so the TMC Venture Fund has gone through a couple of different iterations when it comes to their thesis, but most recently it's seed to Series A B2B companies that are in the digital health or med tech space. So pretty broad when it comes to technology type or even the problems that they're solving. But really more importantly for us, it's about those that are seeking out strategic partnerships with at least one, hopefully more, of the health system or enterprise health systems that are part of the Texas Medical Center. And as many of you know, there's some great brands and large names that are affiliated with us, including MD Anderson, Texas Children's Methodist. So most companies are attracted to that size, but they have to be ready to kind of have a meaningful conversation with those customers or partners. And that's who we're looking for, that are at that stage and are ready to have that kind of conversation.
Great. And Tim, Cox Enterprises.
Yeah, we've been pretty fortunate in over the years, we've been able to invest from seed stage to growth stage. But as we've gotten greater conviction around our investment thesis, we're now similar to Phillip, really looking more to focus on the growth stage. The way that we think about it is, number one, in healthcare, we're focused on really two areas, but both have to be with the aim of helping the consumer or the patient get better care in a modern, frictionless way. And so we have one investment thesis that's around software and services for the self-insured employer, anything that will help bend the cost curve for the employee and the employer at large. And then the second one is around platform and services that help enable or accelerate the shift to value-based care.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And, this morning when I was preparing my notes prior to all of us jumping on this call, I thought of a question that I absolutely have to ask. We're in very exciting times right now. It seems like almost daily new startups and technologies are coming to market that can greatly impact the health of the patient population, our healthcare infrastructure, and more. I'd like to ask each one of you, what's an emerging healthcare technology that you're particularly excited for as an investor? Chris, I'm going to start with you. Sorry to jump to you first here. I know it's a tough one.
Yeah, no worries. I think, especially with the big elephant in the room in terms of the COVID pandemic and the fact that we're doing this remotely, I think just remote care. And there are obviously several aspects of that, from telehealth to remote patient monitoring. And I think those are the technologies that, at least for me, that I've kind of narrowed in on, at least in the near-term horizon. And then when you look at the different therapeutics that are out there with mRNAs and how they've really evolved and really helped us, emerge out of this pandemic, I think, there's a lot of opportunities out there on the therapeutic side as well. I'm mainly more focused on what we could do at a remote site. So kind of the company that I started now with Huxley, we focus mainly on diagnostics and remote patient monitoring in terms of the companies that I invest in, focusing it in more in terms of what could be done more outside the clinic and more outside the hospital. So we can really just focus on using the hospitals and clinics for doing, surgeries and procedures that are just difficult to do remotely.
Yeah, that shift of healthcare from hospital to home is certainly exciting. Some great companies throughout the country really doing some special things. Think companies like Dispatch Health, Hamilton Health Box, the list kind of goes on that side. Lance, I'll ask you the same question. What's an emerging healthcare technology that you're particularly excited for and that TMCX would be excited for as well on the investment side?
I'm going to kind of cheat and answer with a non-answer. So I used to be very tech-centric, especially someone with an engineering background, always excited about what's coming out, what's the latest. And with our involvement in digital health, AI, blockchain, all the buzzwords, we get excited about the potential, I think, for them to be able to be solutions to solve real world big problems in healthcare. But honestly, the more that I've been involved in working with startups, it's more about and I know we always say this, it's more about the team, but it's more about the founder who has a unique perspective on a problem that I hadn't been heard before. So they're looking at an unmet clinical need unlike anybody else. And then the technology kind of becomes secondhand to me. It's almost more important to understand that perspective. And whatever technology is required to solve that problem, I think is something that, that I trust the founder to find. So I don't really have a technology, although I get excited about robotics. I get excited about, AI and the potentials there. But it could be a simple catheter like the company I'm working for now that gets me excited because of how they see the problem differently and how they're changing really the paradigm of how we practice medicine, or a certain paradigm of how we think about a particular pathophysiology. So I kind of cheated there. Sorry, Richard.
No, it's no worries. The simplest solutions can make the biggest impacts. And that's truly, something that I look at in particular on the investor side, those simple innovations that end up changing things in a big way for the patient and whether their workflow or anything of that nature. Those small changes really do end up sometimes in very large downstream ramifications. Phillip, I'll ask you the same question. What's an emerging healthcare technology that you're excited for and that Fulcrum's excited for to invest in?
Yeah, I definitely agree with, both of those comments, especially around remote patient monitoring and in-home care. We've been investing in home health since, and frankly, before we were even a fund. So that's something that's of interest. But, just having just been in that healthcare billing company, I think one of the things that really was fascinating to me is the amount of just kind of waste in the system and wasted expense in the system, and the amount of just services it takes to process claims, process bills, et cetera. So you're seeing a lot of technologies coming out around automated coding, automated denial analytics, automated prior authorization, and taking a lot of the people out of it and really using a lot of the interoperability that's been created over the last, I guess ever since the ACA, and it's been over a decade now. It's taken that long to really get there. We're not saying we're there yet, but there's definitely been a lot of advancements and a lot more access into the EHR, where you can process data a lot more quickly, and a lot more conversation just going to happen automated between payer, provider, and the intermediary. So that's an area that definitely is of interest to us, is basically making the healthcare system more efficient, just because there's a lot of money to be made in taking the waste out of the system.
And a lot of efficiencies that are needed still in healthcare now and well into the future. Tim, what about you in Cox Enterprises?
Yeah, so similar to Phillip, I love seeing waste taken out of the system. So number one, that's one of the elements of value-based care. So folks that are working on, ways to enable value-based care, because then you really just have a focus on what's absolutely necessary. But really, it's also, anything that can help align incentives between the patient, provider, and the payers. Healthcare is a really difficult space. I know a lot of people have the aspirations to do like big disruption, but in healthcare, the other thing you have to remember is you still have to work with everyone in the ecosystem. So you have to be really thoughtful on how can you all play well together in the sandbox. And so it becomes really tricky to come up with like win-win situations. So if you have a novel approach on that, that's something we're always interested in.
Yeah, that's a very interesting take and perspective, handling those different personalities and the egos associated with them. I heard a rumor once that doctors can be hard to work with. I'm not really too sure if that's true, but just a rumor I heard once. Next question, as an entrepreneur turned investor, Chris, your experiences are unique compared to many other investors. What do you think are some of those key differentiators for founders turned investors and advantages as well?
Yeah, I don't know. I think in terms of a advantage, I think just understanding how difficult it can be to take an idea to actually to prototype, to investable product, to building a team around that product and then take it to scale, and understanding not only the technical skills that are needed to execute on that side, but also the soft skills. And I think being able to kind of what Lance referred to earlier, investing in people rather than technologies. And I think that experience of doing it a few times definitely allows me to size up people a lot quicker than I think the most, to see whether or not this person or this team is capable of really taking this concept to an investable thesis, and then from investable thesis whether or not they have skill sets to take it to scale and get to that growth stage. And I think the skill sets that are required to do each one of those components are vastly different. So I think the main thing is finding people that are coachable and that have the capacity to grow at a super high rate and high speed. I think that's allowed me to find others that have that mindset. And I think that's an advantage that I have versus other investors. I'm not sure if that necessarily answered your question.
Oh no, it absolutely did. I think it makes a lot of sense. I have this saying that the founders always know, right? Founders always know when they're around the other founders, the ones that will kind of stand out. There's like almost like an instinct level there, and a lot of I know companies that have come through our way with regards to deal flow, whether it's the Tampa Bay Wave or Blackfin, have actually come from other founders that we've gotten to know and trust over the years. Speaking about founders, Lance, you have a pretty unique set of experiences behind you with regards to running TMCX, one of the nation's top healthcare-focused accelerator programs. How did running the program and really the program as a whole, how does that help TMCX from an investment standpoint put into and find great founders to back?
Great question. Thanks for asking it, Richard. So as you probably know, it started off as an accelerator that happened to have a venture fund or worked with a venture fund. And then it became much more of a venture-centric accelerator, I should say, as we learned a couple of important lessons over the life of the accelerator. So now we've been around for about 6-7 years. And the first lesson was there's no amount of diligence that can replace working side by side with a founder or a team and trying to land a customer or a partner. Early med-tech companies aren't necessarily looking for customers in the first 5 years plus sometimes, but they're looking for strategic partners. They're looking for the opportunity to do a clinical trial and understanding how they think about that and how they approach it and working side by side with them. And for our accelerator, it's 6 months of time. So it became quickly a diligence vehicle more than anything else. And we also learned that we don't want to just invest and stand back and see what happens. We want to obviously protect and nourish our investments. And so our value became drawing on the insight, expertise, and the collective power really of multitude of TMC institutions. And so we learned how to leverage both relationships from the institutions as well as our investments in a meaningful way for both sides. And so that's kind of how we converted and used our perspectives to really support and bring value to our entrepreneurs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't say higher praises for TMCX. I actually am an alumni of the program, having gone through in a very, very early cohort when I was much, much younger. But it was a great experience, and being part of that extended family as an alum has certainly proved valuable for me as I've continued my career and continue to stay engaged with the program. You know, Tim, I'm going to ask you the next question. Corporate venture capital is a lot different from normal venture capital investment in several ways. And many founders don't realize how much so until they're engaging with a CVC. Tim, can you highlight some of the differences between a traditional fund and CVC?
Yeah, first of all, they come in so many different flavors. And some corporate VCs are structured just like regular funds, but most are not. And so you need to really understand the corporate VC that you're working with, like what is their mission and what is their intent. And a lot of times, these corporate VCs are created really to help see around the corner, get closer to the innovation cycle. Frankly, it could be a way to de-risk R&D in new business models. And so those play a number of factors. Corporate VCs also can have very different timelines than a regular VC. So that can play a part when it comes time to speed. Also, as you work with them, there's all sorts of like internal approvals that might be required in a corporate VC that you don't have in a regular VC. And so there's a lot of implications on how you think about it. Again, some corporate VCs will use it as a way to, maybe do M&A. But if you think about it, most of the times startups are at a much smaller scale where it likely won't have a huge impact on a large corporate. So you also have to keep that frame of mind as well. So there are a lot of factors, but there can be a lot of goodness. My key message would be do your research on the corporate VC. If they have portfolio companies, if you get involved with one, ask to interview some of their portfolio companies to see what is the experience like dealing with that particular outfit.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice, and something that I'd welcome all founders to do is really do your homework and your diligence on your investor, just like they're doing it on you too. figure out which partner seems to be the best fit, who you'd want on your board, who could potentially be of value. Not every investor is the same, even within one organization. But I'm going to actually shift over here for my next question to Fulcrum, where it seems like every investor at Fulcrum is fantastic, including Frank, good friend of mine, founder of Fulcrum, I've known for several years. Fulcrum is a strong fund with investments throughout the country, including Atlanta, Tampa, Austin, Seattle, and more. The multiple locations that Fulcrum has a footprint in was always something I found a differentiating factor. And Phillip, I'm curious, how has it impacted deal flow, the ability to support founders, and overall team dynamics?
Yeah, so we're a little unique in our kind of founding. We actually got founded in 2000 as a fundless sponsor. Some guys sold a company called On Target, which is a sales training business, sold to Siebel Systems back at the height of the bubble in December '99, and started making investments with their own capital, and then sort of grew it from there. And now we're investing out of our fourth fund. But it's through that, as we've gotten larger and gotten institutions and endowments as LPs, we stayed true to that fundless model in a sense, where we have over 150 current and former CEOs of businesses as investors in our fund. And that's a real differentiator for us, because these guys and gals live all over the country, all over the world, frankly, and they see deal flow. And people are bringing these high net worth individuals, these entrepreneurs, companies to look at investing in. And we tell all of them, well, we're not going to invest in everything you bring us. We'll at least give it a listen. So we get, leads from our investors all over the place where they say, hey, here's a really good opportunity. I know the founder. Maybe I've worked in the space before. I can introduce them to customers. Might be willing to join the board. So when you look at our investments, we do a lot here in the Southeast because that's where our roots are. But if an LP brings us something in Austin and Seattle and Denver and Phoenix and New Jersey, we'll take a deep dive at it. And if they're there, they know the ecosystem, they can help recruit in those markets for us, we'll definitely do that. And that's, I think, a real differentiator for us, is having that network of executives that can recruit, open customer doors, sit on boards, help us with diligence. That just is something that, we'll always stay true no matter how many funds we're on and, how much capital we're managing in any one fund.
Yeah, having LPs as active members almost of a deal flow and diligence and support. I mean, that's a fantastic idea. And thank you so much for sharing with us, Phillip. Continuing to speak on deal flow, Tim, I'm curious, with the footprint of Cox being national, coupled with the ability to invest across the life cycle of a startup, though you do prefer, of course, the growth stage companies, how does deal flow at Cox keep from being overwhelming for the core team?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was surprised when I first got to Cox, the amount of deals that just come, across the desk unsolicited. And in the beginning, it was rather overwhelming. But our group, as we were setting up, because really our current group was established about 6 years ago, we got more defined in our investment theses. And the more you know about what you want to invest in, the easier it becomes to kind of, see the signals from the noise and to hone in. So we tend to be pretty disciplined and more proactive. So we're typically out hunting more than we are just waiting to catch a deal. But I will say that, look, we've also afforded ourselves the opportunity to be flexible. And if a great deal comes in, even if it's not necessarily aligned with one of our investment theses, we do have the flexibility to invest. Those are special cases because you have to be careful about the type of portfolio you begin to develop. And if you have a bunch of orphans, in some ways you're not serving your portfolio companies that well. But yeah, I would say it's more about being proactive, knowing your investment theses.
Excellent, thank you. Shifting gears for a moment, Chris, you've been part of multiple startups who've been acquired by large organizations in healthcare. Can you share with us a bit about your experiences leading up to and through the acquisitions of MedShape and Vertera Spine by DJO and NuVasive, respectively?
Yeah, I think just to talk a little bit about that, I think every exit's different, kind of like how every startup is different. And I think in terms of, leading up to an exit, I'll kind of talk a little bit about the Vertera one, just because I was a little bit more obviously directly involved in that as the founder and CEO. I think, going in, you have this idea of what you think an exit's going to be and what you think the acquirer would care about. They're typically vastly different than what you see going into. Obviously, an acquirer, and it changes depending on the type of acquirer in terms of what they're actually looking for from like a bigger company like a Medtronic versus what we got at Nuvasive. And I think when you go through that process, I don't think a lot of people complain about the due diligence that's involved in getting institutional funding. I would say it's about 10 times worse doing it in terms of due diligence for an acquirer. They care a lot about, the ghosts or the things that are within your quality system, the things that are within your consulting agreements, the things that are involved in how you're compensating clinicians and how and the like. So they care a lot more about those types of risks and making sure that they're not showing up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal and after they do the deal. So I think, as an entrepreneur, those are the types of things that you want to be more cognizant of if you're trying to get your company ready for a strategic exit in that sense. Obviously, if you're looking more for an IPO type route, those concerns aren't obviously as concerning. So I think really understanding, so I guess the big picture here is really understanding kind of like what type of investor you want to get in terms of, reaching out to and funding your company. Also looking at what type of strategic acquirer do you want to be acquired by, understanding what their care abouts are. And in the case of both Forterra and MedShape, getting multiple bidders to the table and understanding the dynamics between the bidders, whether or not they are going to basically bid up the price of your company because they are arch rivals and just want to do it for the sake of FMO, or the fact that they don't really care about each other, so they're not really going to bid up. I think understanding that dynamics helps a lot, and that actually, to be honest, generates probably the most value for the exit. Just getting the right acquirers at the table and then letting them do their thing.
Excellent. That is fantastic advice. Thank you so much for sharing, Chris. Phillip, Fulcrum's past funds have had numerous successful exits. Honestly, really too many to list here today, given our brief time together. How has Fulcrum been able to leverage relationships and experience of both the team as well as the LP base to help drive their portfolio companies and founders to strong liquidity events?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. A lot of times when you make an investment, you get a lot of congratulatory emails, et cetera, saying, hey, great job on it. But at the end of the day, we're all in it for the exit, frankly. I mean, it's all about driving returns back to our LPs and creating wealth for the entrepreneurs that we work with and their teams. So when we go into an investment, you make sure you're very aligned with the entrepreneur on what their ultimate goals are and where you're going to look to exit it. And who their ultimate, what their desires. They want to build something that's going to be $1 billion business, and they need to start talking to other larger private equity funds and growth equity funds that are going to be able to provide the capital to take them there. Do they eventually want to be bought by a strategic? It's going to fit really well into a strategic portfolio. I'd say the biggest item that has happened over the last kind of decade and a half of doing this is really the emergence of private equity as a buyer. When we got into this, you look at our exit slides when we were going to investment, it was all the strategic buyers. Who are the logical strategic buyers for this company? Because that's who your exit's going to be. And they were always going to pay the bigger multiple. If you sold it to private equity, they were going to be the discount buyer. Now, unless the strategic has a really, great thesis on your business and has been following you and probably already has a partnership with you, has been tracking you, the largest bid you're going to get is from a private equity buyer. They're going to pay a higher multiple. They're going to, be able to close much more quickly. And so a lot of what we're doing with our companies now is figuring out who the private equity buyers are that have theses in the space, that have investments in the space, have platform companies in the space, and having the entrepreneurs start talking to them earlier. So I think that's been the biggest dynamic, is figuring out who the funds are that you should be talking to at an earlier stage versus necessarily figuring out who the strategics are at an earlier stage. So that's something we've been doing a whole lot of. And I think as you think about it, especially as an entrepreneur at an earlier growth stage, you're going to be getting inbounds, once, twice, 3 times a week from different funds. And being able to discern which are the ones to talk to, which are the ones to spend time with, versus which are the ones just to say, hey, I'll get back to you later, is really key. Because you can spend all of your time talking to funds that are reaching out, and making sure you're choosing the right ones to spend time with is really key. It's something I think we help with, because we kind of know that landscape pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. Many times I think founders just, well, I mean, I'll even say this for myself. Sometimes you just don't know what you don't even know. So really having people around you that have been there, done that, that can provide that support and value, that are also driving towards that specific goal that you all have in mind, very much of high value. Speaking on liquidity events, Tim, I've heard many startups over the years talk about how getting CVC investment is a pathway to acquisition. In fact, it was mentioned here several times during our conversation. I'm curious, with your take as TVC at Cox Enterprises, do you think that in today's age of SPACs, PE roll-ups, and IPOs, that the corporate acquisition model is as sexy as it was in years past?
It's an interesting question. I would say, especially looking at digital health right now, IPOs and SPACs are the rage. It's the trend. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs start out thinking, I want to IPO. I think rarely do entrepreneurs think, I'm gonna try and build this to get acquired. But the reality is, I think it depends on who's doing the acquiring and how big the check is. Certainly, if there are some big checks that are being cut, which are exciting, but then it comes down to the culture of the company, who your long-term home is going to be with. Now, granted, there are people that will trade out of the deal, but if you want the company to be sustainable and growing, you really want to think about that long-term home. I think the reality is that all of these options come with usually a lot of operational rigor. PE is going to make sure that your operations are tight. If you go public, there's a lot of things you have to do to build to be able to survive analysts and quarterly reports. So I actually think there is still an attractiveness to being acquired. And one of our portfolio companies recently got acquired. They were on a great run to raise another large round and had IPO in sight. But the combination with with this other company was so attractive in terms of the overall mission of the company that it was just a phenomenal outcome. So I don't think it's lost its luster, but certainly I think there's a lot to be said by what's happening in the markets and the liquidity that's out there.
We've talked a little bit today on what you all look for as investors, what you look for in founders. And for this next question, I'm going to ask kind of the flip side of that coin. There's certain things that will stop me dead in my tracks when it comes to a startup, no matter how well they're moving, how quickly things are going. I just will not get involved at all. I think an example of this for me is if the founder is arrogant or talking over their co-founders and teammates in a meeting with us. And that's something that just really kind of bothers me, and it sets a bad precedent, and it just tells me really quickly that I probably don't want to get engaged with regards to this group. What are some of those things that founders should absolutely not do when engaging each and every one of you? Phillip, I'm going to start with you and Fulcrum Equity Partners.
Yeah, I'd say the number one item that'll kind of get you thrown out with us would be if there's any type of dishonesty. If the trust is broken in any way whatsoever, if you're not telling us, if you're exaggerating your numbers too much. It's one thing as an entrepreneur to say, oh yeah, we booked 600K for the quarter, but you booked like 590. But how you really get our attention? We booked 590. Tell the truth. And it's just really telling the truth. And I'd say another area on that is, we do extensive, not just us, everyone does it, background checks on all their entrepreneurs. And we always say, hey, tell us if we're going to find anything in your background. And if you're upfront and honest with us, assuming it's nothing like totally egregious, if you're upfront and honest with us about what happened, that's fine. It's if we catch something and you weren't honest. That's happened to us before. And we've been sitting there with a background check in front of us and asking, did this happen? And the entrepreneur just lied. And we said, well, we sent him the check afterwards. He said, why didn't you tell us? He said, well, I thought that was going to be before the purview. Like, that doesn't matter. You got to be honest with us because this is a relationship. I mean, when you think about it, as much as you like to say, oh, we'll be in it for 3 to 5 years, we've been in companies for 12 years. That's a long time to be working with somebody. And you need to trust them. You need to have that relationship where you don't have to worry, it's like, oh, is this person bending the truth or anything? So kind of went on that topic for a while. It's just so important. Just honesty, trust is the most important thing. And if you break that in any way along the process, it's irreparable in our opinion.
Absolutely. Chris, what about you?
think those were two really good points, Richard and Phillip. The three things that I really look for in people, and this goes from founders to investors to people that I want to hire for the companies that I'm involved in, it really comes down to humility. So I think that kind of addresses the ego type aspects that you're talking about, Richard, initially. A little bit of people smart. So I call that, I guess it gets overused in terms of EQ, but really just people smarts, like how do you interact with people? And I think that goes more towards what Phillip was talking about. And I think the third thing that wasn't really mentioned is just hunger, the drive. I think, as a serial entrepreneur, it gets tougher to do this, to do the whole entrepreneur thing after you've been successful, after you've made life-changing amount of money and don't necessarily need to go with the grind anymore. But I think, what differentiates, people like me and others is that you're hungry just for this, not necessarily because you want to make money, or not necessarily because you're going for an exit, or not necessarily because you're trying to fill a gap in your ego that, has been filled by, having that claim as an entrepreneur and startup and successful exits. You're just hungry for the sake of being hungry. You're hungry because you just want to hunt and you want to get products out there and you want to grow, you want to scale. And that mentality keeps you up at night and also wakes you up in the morning. That's kind of the third thing that I'm looking for. And I think that's not necessarily I think the first two could definitely be coached. I think that last one can't. I think that's truly intangible that separates successful entrepreneurs from those that are not. So I definitely look for that hunger and being able to, the ability to go out there and seek that next customer, seek that next account when you don't necessarily need to or have to. That's the mentality I'm looking for.
Excellent. Lance, what about you? What are some things that founders should absolutely not do when engaging?
All great points so far by Chris and Phil, and actually a lot of which we share. I have a good story about the arrogance piece, Richard, because I think arrogance is definitely one of those things that just, it's completely over after you show some element of arrogance. We were in a pitch where, the entrepreneur should be pristine and prepared and ready to go. And we asked to see their financials. It was a slide. We were just asking to see a little bit further details on the financials. And he goes, "Oh, you want to see a hockey stick? I'll show you a hockey stick." We all looked at each other in the meeting and we're just like, is this guy serious? And I mean, it didn't matter. At the time, we were super interested in technology, interested in how they saw the problem. But as soon as he walked out of the room, we're like, this is a no deal. So, I mean, a simple, stupid statement like that can really offset, your chance and ability to be invested in. And I totally agree with Phil and Chris. And I look at it more like you're hiring somebody almost for a job. And are these people that you want to work with for a long period of time? And one of the things that I've seen, having spent a lot of time with, beyond the interview, I guess I should say, is when people are outside of their element, how they behave and act is really important. And one of those things that stands out in my mind, just as we're talking here, is how they go about validating their assumptions. And this probably has a little bit to speak to ego and humility, but are they taking one person's opinion for it, or their own opinion for their assumptions, and kind of running full steam ahead? Or are they taking the time to really validate their thoughts and their hypotheses? Are they talking to 50 people about the problem, or are they just talking to 2 people within their institution? And that really kind of goes back to showing their ability to be resourceful, to be hungry, as Chris mentioned. But are they putting in the time and effort to validate these assumptions? Is what really sticks out to me. And if you're not doing that, that's kind of a no-go.
Excellent. Thank you, Lance. Tim?
Yeah, look, I think all of the points that everyone's made are really, really important. I maybe the one that I would just underscore a little bit more is we also tend to be long-term in our investments and our relationships. So to be inauthentic is something that will, easily sort you out of the crowd very, very quickly, because we are looking for that long-term relationship. All of the things that were mentioned around, honesty, humility, but then authenticity is just, if we're going to be in it for the long haul and we're going to put a lot of capital behind it, we want to get to know you. And we don't come with this notion that everyone is perfect, but it's what's the ability to solve problems And it's okay to admit that you don't know. If you have all the answers, then that sort of leads to, oh, maybe they're not coachable, maybe they're not, able to, recognize the bounds of what they can do. So that's probably what I'd add.
Excellent. I think great advice, top to bottom, not just with that question, but really with this entire session here. Thank you again, all of you. I think that's a great probably place to pause today with regards to this particular session. So founders, any founders here on at the conference that are listening in, just remember to be authentic. Don't hide things. Be open and honest. Remember that if you take investment from any of the groups here in today's panel, they're going to be there to support you like great investors will along your journey, really hit your milestones and then drive you towards that exit. And it's a team effort, right? So it doesn't really make a lot of sense to start things off on the wrong foot, no matter how dramatic your hockey stick growth may be. With that, thank you again to all of our panelists for joining us today. Thank you to all of those joining us today remotely as well as our conference sponsors, Mark Jarbo, Russ Lapari, and the entire Health South team, and every one of you again joining today. I hope that you found our conversation insightful. And for all founders, please do feel free to reach out to any of us for help as you travel along your journey. I'm Dr. Richard Benassi, looking forward to chatting in person at next year's Health Connect South conference and meeting each and every one of you. Have a great day and be safe out there. Take care, everyone.